Media, a host of ever-changing, ever-developing interface impacting our world. Media has become global, that it is now used to connect, share, relate, and mobilize across the globe. With this concept, media changed the way it is produced, circulated, distributed, and consumed. This evolution is called globalization of media. But what is globalization? Globalization is defined as the emergence of a single world market dominated by multinational companies, leading to a diminishing capacity for national governments to control their economies. In simpler terms, it refers to all the activities including services, companies, people, and so on being connected to a global scale or going global. We take for example McDonald's. McDonald's started its business in the United States, but in recent years expanded its business scope globally. That's why we see a lot of McDo branches here in the Philippines and all around the globe. While globalization talks about being global, glocalization on the other hand refers to the activities both global and local. To be more specific, it refers to global activities that can be replicated or gain the aspect of the locals. For example, a website called YouTube operates globally. To attract more people in different regions, they enhance their website by allowing different language subtitles. So, in a localized YouTube, the content varies depending on the region. It allows people like Mikey Bustos, Alex Gonzaga, Niana Gutierrez, Maurice Racal, and many more locals to create and produce their own videos but still using the same platform. Now let's compare the two. Going back to McDonald's, McDonald's have restaurants in every country, and that is globalization. But the menus are not the same in each country, and that's localization. Like McDonald's in India, because Indians don't eat beef, hamburgers are not available, but chicken is used as a replacement. But let us not forget that globalization and localization cannot be separated. Because when you globalize, you trade with different countries and different cultures. So, you have to localize your product to have a positive outcome. In essence, you have to make your product attractive and user-friendly to the local market.
Globalization is a widely discussed topic. It is therefore not all that easy to explain such a complicated term in simple words. Let's start from the beginning with the background to globalization. Advances in technology, such as mobile phones, aeroplanes, telephones, and the internet, have made the growth of transport and communication networks possible. Amongst other things, this means that people and countries can exchange information and goods more quickly and in a less complicated way. This process is called globalization. Globalization comes from globe and means the worldwide coming together of countries and nations. Let's look at an example. Companies used to manufacture products in their home countries, just like the companies Profi TV and Supercolor, who produce televisions in country A. Their products are in direct competition with each other, but both companies pay the same salaries and production costs. They have the same customers, use similar suppliers, and sell televisions at similar prices. In short, the same conditions apply to both companies. So far, so good. Due to technical, cultural, and economic developments that have come about through globalization, other companies which manufacture products under different conditions can now offer their products in country A too. That's why a company from country B can sell televisions here at a lower price because they were produced for less. The local firms Supercolor and Profi TV have to react to withstand the competition. And so the world grows closer together, and there is an active exchange of goods between countries. More affordable products are available for more people. However, not only does an exchange of products and economic goods take place, but also of services, knowledge, cultural goods, and even languages. All of these individual elements are closely linked and influence each other. But where there is light, there is also shadow. Because of globalization and this intense exchange of goods, people and the environment often suffer. If a company decides to move production to an economically disadvantaged country, people in industrialized countries lose their jobs. At the same time, job opportunities open up to many locals in the economically disadvantaged country. Many people in these countries work for very little money in comparison to those in industrialized countries. Therefore, they often remain poor and more often than not do not have sufficient insurance, social insurance, or health insurance cover. A further disadvantage of globalization is ecological problems such as climate change. The use of aeroplanes, ships, and lorries to transport goods over international borders is constantly on the increase. This causes more carbon dioxide to be released into the atmosphere, which, in turn, is the main cause of global warming. Even national environmental standards are ignored. This is a further cost factor in the worldwide international site competition, which should be kept as low as possible to be attractive for a company. There are therefore many sides to globalization, which affect almost all aspects of life, causing me to think that the chain of positive and negative effects will continue to grow further. What's important is to realize that globalization itself is neither good nor bad. It just depends how people deal with all the new possibilities in the future.
The evidence of globalization is everywhere, but it is important to recognize that not everyone is in favor of it. Some groups argue that TNCs are responsible for many of the world's environmental problems. These problems include global warming, the depletion of natural resources, and the production of harmful chemicals. Some groups also claim that TNCs take advantage of developing countries by polluting industries within their borders, logging their tropical forests, and exploiting their labor. Other concerns include the loss of local culture, the tendency for developed countries to interfere in the affairs of developing countries, and the reduced power of governments to control economic activity. However, there are people who support globalization and suggest it benefits individuals and the global community. Supporters of globalization claim that it results in faster economic growth, quicker access to new technology, cheaper imports, and greater competition. Supporters of globalization also argue that globalization will make the world economy more efficient and will continue to create hundreds of millions of jobs, mainly in developing countries.
Globalization, the growing integration of economies and societies around the world, has been one of the most hotly debated topics in international economics over the past few years. Rapid growth and poverty reduction in China, India, and other countries that were poor 20 years ago, has been a positive aspect of globalization. But globalization has also generated significant international opposition over concerns that it has increased inequality and environmental degradation. But what is the concept of globalization? Globalization is the most talked and debated issue in the contemporary world. It is a concept that escapes precise definition. In most cases, it is described rather than defined. Some commentators have described globalization as a stage of capitalism, or late modernity, and some remarks that globalization is a new way of thinking. However, it does not mean the same thing for all. For some, globalization is a process of opening up economies so that trade between countries could take place freely. For them, increasing globalization has helped the expansion of opportunities for nations and benefited workers in rich and poor countries alike. Brings positive benefits for consumers, helping to increase choice, drive down prices, improve services, and create new jobs and opportunities. Globalization can therefore be seen as a positive force for change that has the potential to raise living standards and drive economies forward. However, this is not readily acceptable for all. Many think globalization as the concerted strategy of the industrial world, particularly of the multinational corporations, to safeguard their interest and spur a new form of colonization. After opening of market, less developed countries will become a supermarket of foreign goods, which are cheaper, killing local industries, and increasing many more jobless. For them, globalization means increasing poverty and deteriorating living standard of the workers, widening disparity between the rich and the poor within the country, and among the countries, and internationalization of capital to the detriment of labor market. Even for the moderates, globalization is a process of restructuring the world economy, to find ways for business to maximize profits. And even some ultra-skeptics have dismissed any notion of globalization as myth. Those analysts' claims concerning globalization are greatly exaggerated, if not utter fantasy. The International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, and the World Trade Organization, and more generally, the high-income countries are held responsible for influencing and largely determining the course of the globalization process. They are also seen as the driving forces behind the policy reforms that the developing countries had to implement as part of their structural adjustment programs under the supervision of the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, and the World Trade Organization. It is obvious that those countries and organizations will only foster their own interests. Globalization has become an unstoppable phenomenon affecting all aspects of our lives. Some governments, political parties and trade unions often view this development as at best challenging and at worst sinister. Business and their representative organizations, on the other hand, promote the benefits of open trade, across political boundaries and the integration of markets to create global opportunities. Globalization is a process of increasing economic and non-economic linkages across the world. In the broadest sense, globalization implies integration of economies and societies across the globe. It is equated with the massive, irresistible cross-border flow and integration in the movement of goods, technology, labor, and capital, resulting mainly from breakthroughs in transportation and communication technology. In a wider perspective, globalization covers various activities such as cultural globalization, political globalization, ecological globalization, economic globalization, and so on. But here I am mainly discussing economic globalization, and at the same time try to cover some other aspects of globalization as well. Economic globalization implies increasing global interlinkages of the markets in goods, services, capital, and financing. Such a process has speeded up in the recent decade. The contributory factors for rapid economic globalization are liberalization, deregulation, privatization, and declining costs of transport and communication. The microelectronics revolution has irrevocably changed the essence of human contact to Earth. Distances are shrinking and information is spreading faster than ever before. The Internet and World Wide Web have helped this process. Perhaps the most important catalyst for globalization is the spread of information and communications technology. Through the magic of information and communications technology, it is now possible to instantly access useful information through the Internet and the latest computer technology. While talking about globalization, we must understand that most less developed countries' national economy is not even internally integrated. Market institutions and forces are yet to emerge in a competitive way. Nearly half of the world population lives in absolute poverty and illiteracy. More than 70% of the population earns livelihood from agriculture, which, however, constitutes only about 40% of the less developed country's national income. Lack of proper planning process, commitment, accountability, and integrity of the governments, and lack of people's participation in development activities cause that the developing countries, particularly the less developed countries, have not been able to substantially benefit from international trade, due to both external as well as internal constraints. The developing countries have not been able to increase their share in international trade, despite the preferential market access opportunities provided by the developed countries. It has been realized that market access for the developing countries is commercially meaningless, if they cannot increase their competitiveness in the sectors in which they have preferential treatment. In the developing countries, lack of efficient production facilities, adequate infrastructure, weak management capacities, low level of technology and lack of technological capacity and inefficient transportation, communication and education, limits their potential to specialize in crucial productive sectors and to reap the benefit of preferential trading facilities. For economies like most less developed countries, to integrate into the world trading system, on terms and conditions favorable to their development needs, they need to build their capacity to negotiate at the multilateral level. This will happen only if they are able to increase their ability to understand the multilateral trading regime espoused by the World Trade Organization and formulate their national policies to benefit from it. They also need to strengthen their capacity to benefit from international trade by increasing their competitiveness through investment in infrastructure, development of human resources, strengthening of institutional capacity, enhancement of technological capability, and supporting local enterprises, including linkages between large and small enterprises. By joining the World Trade Organization, they can now fully enjoy the rights that all members have under the World Trade Organization agreements, such as non-discrimination by other World Trade Organization members, and the ability to use the World Trade Organization's dispute settlement procedure. The membership will provide tremendous international market opportunities for less developed countries. However, taking advantage of the new opportunity will also be quite challenging. Most of less developed countries has few industries and hence very little to export. Many of them do not have enough surplus produce. Threats to domestic industries from cheap imports also loom. Information and communications technology allows trade to become simpler and more streamlined even. It needs not and arguably should not entail universalization, thus increasing the value and speed of transactions. Companies are not limited to physical locations or their own organizational boundaries for providing products and services. Networked information systems are allowing companies to coordinate their geographically distributed capabilities and even coordinate with other organizations as virtual corporation. One major advantage of promoting electronic commerce in most developing countries is that they can provide relatively cheap access to global markets even for small and medium-sized enterprises in remote areas. Small and medium enterprises have been playing a significant role in the economic development of most developing countries. Potential benefits of e-commerce for the developing countries are immense. Any company can enter global markets where size and location have become rather irrelevant. Success in e-commerce will have an immediate impact not only on productivity and profits, but also generate new jobs, employment, educational opportunity, and livelihood. Even that most accounts of globalization have been silent on its consequences for knowledge framework, Friedrich Aaron believed that information and communications technology has even generate fundamental different methodologies in the developing countries. As the student in the developing countries can now attend some of the best international university courses online, and accessing almost any information to educate themselves in the same level as their competitor in developed countries. From not having access to any books to all books in the world. However, after accession of World Trade Organization, most countries have tremendous opportunities for exporting their products in the international market. As even the former head of Iran's National Center for Research on Globalization says, Tehran should prioritize joining the World Trade Organization. But to substantially benefit from international trade, less developed countries must need to strengthen their capacity by increasing their competitiveness through investment in infrastructure, development of human resources, strengthening of institutional capacity, enhancement of technological capability, educational improvement, and supporting local enterprises, including linkages between large and small enterprises. As Esfandiar Rahim Mashway noted that it would not be possible to attract investments without providing the necessary support to the private sector. We have been experiencing the fact that the more technologically capable countries continue to dominate their less capable counterparts, effectively monopolizing opportunities for economic growth through their insurmountable advantage in information and communications technology. Given these diverse possibilities occasioned by globalization, it is of extreme necessity for developing countries to re-examine the trends in information and communications technology development worldwide, and devise ways by which their advantages can be maximized. This includes the need to extend the breadth and reach of information and communications technology to peoples and sectors that stand to benefit the most, while curtailing its illicit and destructive uses. Even though there are those who do not support globalization, the fact is that it is here to stay, and if we do not embrace this thought, we may get burned. But the challenge for less developed countries is how to achieve a sustainable development in the globalized world of rapid technological change, driven by inequalities of wealth and power. And the main question is how less developed countries could achieve competitive advantage, when the injustice global competition for educated talent has distorted the local market for educated professionals in many of less developed countries. As the population of the developed world ages, many countries face shortages of quality educated professionals. Western nations are turning to younger nations to fill this gap. Brain drain is a significant policy challenge for developing countries undergoing globalization. Brain drain describes the emigration of educated and highly skilled workers. Every day, in countries all over the world, people leave their home countries in search of a better life for themselves and their families. However, to address the solution to those issues, we may need to define sustainability and the concept of sustainable production first. Sustainability has now become world's #1 issue, to be pursued for achieving a concrete and long-lasting development. It is a process which tells of a development which commands all aspects of human life affecting sustenance. Sustainability means resolving the conflict between the two competing goals, the sustenance of human life and the integrity of nature. Sustainability involves the simultaneous pursuit of economic prosperity, environmental quality and social equity, famously known as three bottom lines. In essence, sustainability is the ability of sustaining sustainable development, which is a process of change in which the exploitation of resources, the direction of investments, the orientation of technological development, and institutional change are all in harmony, and enhance both current and future potential to meet human needs and aspirations. The concept of sustainability is discussed at a time when environmental problems caused by the various human activities are requiring serious attention. Remedy lies with sustainable development, approaching the management of natural resources and the adverse effects of globalization in order to address a range of problems. In 1992, the international community has adopted at the Earth Summit, in Rio de Janeiro, discussed Agenda 21, the world's plan of action for sustainable development. It was a landmark achievement, incorporating environmental, economic, and social concerns into a single framework. It contains over 2,500 wide-ranging and achievable recommendations for action on issues such as reducing wasteful use of natural resources, fighting poverty, protecting the atmosphere, oceans, animal, and plant life. So, sustainability is achieved when it meets the needs of the present, without compromising the ability of the future generations to meet their own needs. As agreed, in Rio de Janeiro, sustainable development is associated with issues of social justice, and the environmental democracy, which stands for the creative participation of international communities in the construction of the new environmental rationality for sustainable production. So following the Agenda 21, as the roadmap to achieve sustainable development, brain drain in the developing countries can be solved by creation of an independent, international organization in the interest of global sustainable development, to regulate the flow of people across borders, and make sure that the training and education of skilled workers will not be at the expense of less developed countries. As a stepstone, for fighting poverty and promoting democracy, people in the developing countries need to be trained, and having access to the education, and as the training and education is still cheaper in the less developed countries than the developed countries. Developed countries, by compensating less developed countries, can use those people as their source for the future labor shortage, and at the same time achieve economic of scale, and creating a new market. Of course, the economic policy is not the only core human and social values. But as the most governments have engaged in sustainable development policies, driven by the idea of economic progress, this can be a good starting point, followed by the pursuit of other primary concerns, such as cultural promotion, ecological care, democracy and peace. But does the globalization and economic progress help humanity to achieve or improve our values such as ecological care, democracy, and peace? To answer this question, we shall define and describe each of those elements separately in details, which are clearly beyond the space of this video. However, as we all know, economic inequality and the poverty has been the base of most human conflict, even though Paul Hurst believed most likely that the environmental crises will cause the shortage of resources, raw material, water, dry land and energy, which will produce competing claims for resources, and being the main reason for the future conflict and wars. But even without it, looking at many studies and researches which has been done on the effects of globalization on environment, democracy, and peace, we can certainly claim that globalization and economic progress will help, and has helped the improvement of our living standard, and so many of those values vital to us. However, even though the discourse on sustainable development is not homogeneous, but most people will agree that it will be easier to overcome future global challenges with international cooperation, rather segregation, whatever the challenges will be, environmental degradation, or regional conflict.
Coca-Cola. There may be no other product that reaches more of mankind. With 500 brands and 3,500 products, 1.9 billion times a day, a consumer somewhere around the world reaches for a Coca-Cola product. A product whose iconic white lettering against a bright red background is recognized by 94% of the world's population. A product whose name is the second most understood term in the world behind OK. A product whose companies $35.1 billion in revenue makes it the 84th largest economy in the world, just ahead of Costa Rica. A single product that can trace the cultural, economic, and political aspects of globalization: Coca-Cola. By riding the powerful wave of globalization, the Coca-Cola Company has penetrated the Earth's farthest corners, from Atlanta, Georgia, to Papua New Guinea. An entity that globally influential, however, tends to attract a lot of critics. For many people, inside and outside of the United States, Coca-Cola is pure Americana, an icon of essential U.S. national culture. But when Coke aired its new patriotic commercial with America the Beautiful, sung in various languages during the 2014 Super Bowl, controversy ensued.
Beautiful for spacious skies, por tus olas de granos d'amber, yo
What could possibly be wrong with this? Well, a lot, apparently. A lot of nasty, ugly reaction on Twitter and Coke's Facebook page. One example, quote, "Speak English or go home."
Americans lashed out on social media, protesting Coca-Cola's efforts to showcase the country's diverse population. Let's take an American patriotic song and make it foreign. Good one, Coke. Still confused as to why they were singing about America in all those foreign languages in the Coke commercial. We speak English. I'll never drink another Coke after that heinous un-American commercial. I'm utterly disgusted. But while Americans complained about Coke's efforts to be more global, the rest of the world feared that the American-based company was spreading a blanket of homogeneity across the globe. Many believe the company to be a leading agent of the movement towards monoculturalization. Monoculturalization is an ideology depicting the spread of Western ideals that ultimately replace distinguished traditional customs in certain areas. Coca-Cola's effort to localize a distinctively American drink in every foreign context is unparalleled. The company alone spends more money on advertising than Microsoft and Apple combined in order to promote its American flagship product as a universal commodity. Many critics see this universalism as a mechanism that alienates and ultimately removes all traces of the particular local region. They fear that a globally contextualized product will inevitably lose its tangible local roots during its transition to a more abstract and global entity. However, the Coca-Cola Company isn't simply a steamroller of globalization that eradicates everything in its path. Rather, Coke practices disembedding, a phenomena where companies remove their product from its original context and reconstruct it to fit a more global scene. The company then re-embeds its product to cater to specific regions around the world, often using local context to shape its marketing strategy. Shown in its multitude of global advertising, Coke has indeed taken its distinctively American product and allowed for it to feel familiar anywhere. Coke shifted away from simply translating advertisements from English to other languages, and instead began utilizing targeted marketing to reach its local customers by adjusting advertisements to fit in with local customs and sayings. Even within the specific country of India, for example, Coke wishes different states a happy holiday in their various state dialects. One for Uttar Pradesh, one for Rajasthan, one for Maharashtra, one for Tamil Nadu. So rather than feeling like a foreign company is erasing precious local culture, Coke consumers actually feel as though the company is simply adding to their already existing practices. They don't regard their culture as a bounded entity that ought to be insulated against change. Instead, they adapt Coke as an additional part of their cultural identity and tradition. Consideration of the movement of worldly things, such as soft drinks from New York to New Guinea, is not a novel way of viewing globalization. Coca-Cola is certainly a symbol of that global connection. Whether the corporation is being criticized for monoculturalization or praised for practicing disembedding, the Coca-Cola company's influence and power as a global player is undeniable. A global player whose brand is worth an estimated $74 billion, more than Budweiser, Pepsi, Starbucks, and Red Bull combined. A global player whose product is sold in more than 200 countries. A global player that has changed the world. Coca-Cola.
I sometimes describe myself as a culturally conflicted Englishman. I am first generation born in the UK. I was educated at the French Lycée in London for 13 years. I spent a lot of my childhood in Italy and 30 years as an international lawyer. And I've always been fascinated by cultural differences. But I think it was arriving in New York as a 21-year-old student that I got my first taste of the oxymoron I'd like to share with you today. Global village. Not global village in the way brilliantly described by Marshall McLuhan when he predicted the internet in the 1960s, but more as a word that we use, an expression we use a lot now. My New York experience was not momentous, but it left a huge effect on me. I spent my first day walking the streets in awe. The word awesome had not yet become fashionable. And at the end of the day, I decided to take a cab to have dinner with some family friends. I knew about cabs. I'd taken cabs in London. And so I got into the cab, and in my very English, polite, maybe apologetic way, I said to the cab driver, "Good afternoon. Do you think you could possibly take me to?" And I read him the address on the piece of paper. He looked around. His eyes had gone funny at this stage. His brain was clearly working overtime. His answer was unforgettable. "Sonny, do you want to go or don't you want to go?" Well, of course, at this stage, I was confused because I did want to go, because I was expected for dinner. But I thought for many days and many hours about that encounter. Rude, confused. Was it me? Was it him? And it made me realize for the first time how very different we all are and how differently we communicate. That "Sonny, do you want to go or don't you want to go?" was followed by many other examples during my career as a young and not so young lawyer. I remember as a very young lawyer negotiating with the Japanese. And I went back to the office very proud. "They agreed to everything," I said. And my boss looked at me and said, "Peter, are you sure?" "Oh, yes." They kept on saying yes. And he explained to me, of course, that yes meant that they had heard me, not that they agreed. I realized with my Dutch and my German and some of my American clients that directness doesn't necessarily mean rudeness, a bit like my cab driver in New York. And I also, of course, learned that the English really do talk in a code that nobody understands. I could cite many examples if we had time, but one of them always reminds me of the Italian who, when he was told by an Englishman that the Englishman was slightly disappointed by something the Italian said, the Italian said, "Why did he even mention it?" I explained that slightly disappointed in English meant extremely angry, and probably you will never be forgiven. I learnt about negotiations and the fact that displays of emotion, of anger, don't necessarily mean that a deal is off, even walking out of a room. I learnt about time. Now, I'm one of these people who, if I have a conference call at 8:30, because I'm what's called monochronic, I will dial in at 8:26, just in case the password doesn't work the first time. Some cultures don't do that. Some cultures, time is, how shall I put it, a guideline. The world won't end if the meeting starts 20 minutes late. Relax. What are you getting so excited about? I also learnt about lunches and negotiations, and that in some cultures, a long lunch, in the Middle East, in France, for example, can be an integral part of a negotiation. And I always remember a Frenchman who once said that when his New York colleagues suggested that they have a working lunch with a sandwich, he actually felt physically sick. I learnt about the use of silence in Finland. I'm still learning every day. You see, my belief is that the idea that there's a global village is a myth. There is no single village. There are many villages on our globe. We talk about global warming, global economy, global crisis, global communication, but village life, village culture still rules. I don't make any value judgment when I say that, but I do believe that we have to stop believing in the quasi-mythical powers of globalization. And we have to start remembering how very, very easy it is to misunderstand each other. We live in paradoxical times. And what I call the 21st century paradox has got two pillars to it. The first is the dominance of English, certainly in the world of commerce, as the lingua franca of the world. The second is our unrelenting and total reliance on digital communication. Both of those lead to what's called a cross-cultural dilemma. The belief that because English is spoken so much, and because it's so easy to communicate, that we really do understand each other. But we sit in boardrooms, Brits, Americans, Chinese, Russians, French, often negotiating English. Do we always understand each other? Often not. We interpret subjectively. We jump to conclusions. We look at the world through eyes and lenses that are designed to correct our vision and not the other person's. We stereotype. We also think and react very quickly. And the question we may want to ask ourselves is, do we even talk enough? We send 100 billion business emails every day. I sit in my own isolated cultural space, in Aix, in London, in Paris, in New York, and I write my email, and within seconds it arrives in another person's cultural space, a space different to mine, one where the context is different. But email doesn't have a loop back. There is no visual or even oral clue that my words may have been misunderstood. My tone may have been misinterpreted. I write that email in a vacuum, unaware of cultural variables. So culturally, we're not global. You see, it's all about context. It's all about the individual or the cultural group to which he or she belongs. My context, your context, their context. We communicate, or rather we have contact. But does contact mean communication? You know, it's a bit like internet dating. You can meet somebody online, but at some point you've got to have dinner with them. And I also ask myself a question you may have asked. Have we forgotten that telephones were originally designed to have conversations on and to have dialogue? Are we relying too much on purely data? At its origin, cultural shock was a term which we probably remember, used to describe that feeling of disorientation that an expat felt when they went for the first time to another country. He or she experienced it firsthand and in situ. But now, something different has happened. Cultural shock has become invisible. It's become virtual. It's hidden behind our technology. And the learning experience, which we would have gained from either a conversation or face-to-face communication, is missing. The psychologist Paul Václavic once said, "What is true is not what I say, but what you understand." I can't see you that well, but I bet you if I ask the following question, how many women in the room think that men always understand them? How many hands go up? Not many. Interesting. And if I then change the question and say, how many men in the room think that women sometimes don't understand us? Are there any men's hands? Yeah, there are hands going up. You see, it's all about programming. In this world of ours, we're not all Macs or all PCs. And even the same computer may have a different keyboard. We need to focus now on creating new software so that those of you who are Macs in this room and those of you who are PCs in this room can communicate effectively and harmoniously. And the key to that is cultural intelligence. The key to that is understanding different cultures and learning techniques to adapt in order to improve. It's not about taking away. It's not about losing our own cultural identity. Cultural intelligence is about realizing quite simply that we don't all reason and think the same way. That culturally we look at a variety of important things very differently. Risk, uncertainty, leadership, power, hierarchy, relationships, trust. But it's also about understanding our own culture within those parameters. There is a lovely saying, the last thing the fish notices is the water he is swimming in. Cultural intelligence can be taught, and I believe it is one of the key instruments to help us navigate the 21st century paradox. My conviction is simple. We need to make cultural intelligence part of our education system at all levels. It must become a foundation stone. We need to teach it in our homes. We need to teach it in our schools, in our universities, in our business schools, in our places of worship, in our community centers, in every one of our villages. Our children need it. I need it. You need it. Our colleagues need it. And dare I also venture an idea? Maybe our politicians and our leaders also need a strong dose of cultural intelligence. Yes, this is a call to arms, if you like. We owe it to ourselves and we owe it to each other. You know, the dreamer in me believes that if we make cultural intelligence teaching at all levels part of the education system, we may combat bigotry a bit more and increase tolerance. Who knows? But at least, let's make it part of our daily interactions. The French writer Antoine de Saint-Exupéry said something beautiful. Si tu diffères de moi, mon frère, moins de me léser, tu m'enrichis. If you differ from me, my brother, rather than harm me, you enrich me. And so, the next time you send an email, or the next time you get into a cab or an Uber in New York, remember that your village does not represent the world. And maybe if collectively we all do that on an everyday basis, we may create a better, a richer, and let us hope, a safer world. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us here today. Few CEOs can claim the success that you've had here at Starbucks. But as you reflect on this journey, maybe an unfair question, but what would be the highlight of that journey?
I think we've really tried to build a different kind of company that would balance profitability and benevolence. And I think the manifestation of that, which is probably the highlight of my career, has been creating two unique benefits for our people. That was comprehensive health insurance way before the current administration mandated that, and secondarily, equity in the form of stock options. My father, in many ways, never got a chance to work for a company that respected him because he was a non-educated a war veteran, and I think in the back of my mind, maybe my whole life I was trying to build the kind of company that my father never got a chance to work for.
We talk about a two-speed world. High growth in the developing markets, slower growth in the developed markets. How does Starbucks think about growth in those two segments? What are your aspirations? Are you satisfied with where you are?
We're growing as fast as we possibly can in Asia and specifically in China because the wind is at our back, and we understand that. In Europe, given the macroeconomic challenges around the Eurozone and all the issues involved in that, we've decided to grow in a different way. But we're still growing there. We're going to use and leverage licensing and JV partners as opposed to company-owned stores where there's less risk in terms of our own capital, but our commitment to growth and building market share and building the leader is the same.
How do you make sure that these markets that you're wanting to really grow in, they might be smaller relative to the large market of the US, how do you make sure that they get management's attention, they don't get smothered by the large market?
Well, when a customer goes into a Starbucks store in any small town in America, or in this case, a country that might be a little bit smaller, I don't think they're conscious of whether or not that town doesn't have the infrastructure, the scalability, or the long-term opportunities that perhaps New York City has or China in terms of growth and development. So we have to view every store on its own merit, and as a result of that, we can't in any way not fund and provide the resources and the tools for those markets. If that's the case, we should never have opened there, and we should go home. I think our commitment to resourcing those markets and providing tools for our people are the same whether we're in China or Cyprus.
Do you have a global incentive program for the senior guys to make sure that they focus on both? Do you kind of carve out time at senior meetings to make sure that you have time spent on maybe smaller but high growth countries?
Well, interestingly enough, we recently, over the last few months, changed the way in which Starbucks is organized. We've now gone to a 3-region model globally. So the Americas, Asia Pacific, and the EMEA. We've gone from a centralized way in which we're managing the business to 4 separate presidents managing the 3 regions and the CPG business, and they have resources and tools, and in a sense, they are respectfully the CEO of their own business.
How different can the business models be? You sort of alluded to maybe in Europe you're going to be doing stuff less through company-owned stores. I mean, how much variation do you allow across the regions?
Well, I think if any consumer brand believes that they can create the local relevance sitting in a white tower somewhere in the US and dictate the ways in which consumers are going to react all over the world, I think it's a collision course with time. And so the issue that we have to understand and execute against is we have to create the balance between the Starbucks experience that customers all over the world expect and desire, integrated with a healthy dose of local relevancy in which we are demonstrating respect to the local customer.
I assume that the culture is fairly similar around the world, but are there differences in culture that you allow? How do you manage the boundaries of that?
We have 200,000 people in 60 countries, different languages, customs, politics, all different types of external issues that we have to integrate into the culture of Starbucks. What I have found, and I think what has been perhaps the biggest surprise of my life is that the culture and values of Starbucks is as relevant and as desirable in Amman, Jordan, and Singapore and Malaysia as it is in Seattle, Washington, because people generally, whether you are an employee of a company or a customer, I think we all want the same kinds of things, and they're universal. You want to be respected, you want to be valued, and you want to be treated in a way that is dignified. And I think those are universal tenets. We just did something in China that I think is one of the most innovative things we've ever done in our history, but it had nothing to do with the customer. It wasn't customer facing, it was internal. And that is, we just had an annual meeting of parents. Think about an annual meeting of shareholders. We had an annual meeting of parents in Beijing and Shanghai. We had about 90% participation. We didn't know who would come and how many. In most cases, there were whole families. There were parents, grandparents, aunts and uncles. It was unbelievable. We had simultaneous translation. We had certainly we had demonstrations of what the company is about. We had partners speaking on behalf of the company of what it's been like working at Starbucks in Mandarin. And then we had people from other countries expressing their relationship with the company. And then certainly I got up and spoke about what we're trying to do in China and why. And it was a stunning experience. Beijing was great, and Shanghai was even better because it was bigger, and I think we were a little bit better 2 days later than we were the first time, because I think we candidly had some trepidation about how it would be, and it turned out to be really, I think, a breakthrough for the company and a real milestone for local relevancy and sensitivity, and had nothing to do about marketing or the customer. But in our case, it had everything to do with the equity of the brand, the culture and values of the company. And to your question, it was as locally relevant as anything we've ever done, and yet it was part of the culture and fabric of a 40-year history.
Have you thought about, are you going to do that globally in other countries?
I can't think of how many parents would show up in America. And I think that says something, doesn't it?
So talent actually relates to that. Attracting talent is a global issue. Have you had challenges recruiting in the developing markets, these high growth markets?
The short answer is we have not had trouble attracting and retaining great people. I think the issue for us is getting the right people in the right position. I think there's quite a debate inside Starbucks today about expats. And this goes back to your question about culture. I think it's hard for any company to build an organization that doesn't have any of the imprinting and relationship with the history of Starbucks. So by and large, we have sent a lot of people overseas to help build the organization, and it turns out it's extraordinarily expensive, and there's a trade-off there. I think those companies that do it very well, and I don't think we're there yet, have built a pipeline of people at the local level, and that's what we need to do.
Most people will say the days of exporting products and ideas from developed countries to developing countries is over. In fact, some people may say that it's going the other way now, that people are learning a lot from developing markets. Are you finding that's true or not? How do you think about global rollout of ideas?
The real issue and the challenge is creating disruptive innovation that changes the market, that gives people real value and a significant opportunity to enhance their life, whatever the product or category is. And from my perspective, I will be a sponge of any innovative idea, product, category from any part of the world. And so I don't think about it in those terms. And we certainly have benefited from certain flavors, categories of bringing stuff over from Asia. But I think the lifeblood of trying to grow an enterprise is truly creating innovative, breakthrough, disruptive ideas. And I wouldn't want to put a label on whether or not it can or should not come from one place or the other.
How much time do you and the leadership team spend outside the US in these, and particularly in the developing economies?
I think if I looked at my calendar the last 12 months, I think maybe 40% of my time I'm traveling, and I would say 80% of it is outside the U.S. And I think you go where the opportunities are, and then you go where the crisis is or the challenges.
And how do you connect with 200,000 partners?
Very hard, really hard. I think we are a company that I think benefits from physical meetings and touching people and being with our people. So it requires a tremendous amount of travel. We instituted something maybe 20 years ago, which we call open forums, where on a quarterly basis we're standing up in front of all of our partners, our people, and talking about the past quarter's accomplishments, but mostly we're talking about an open environment, almost like a town hall meeting where there's an open mic, and it's our people talking to us about their ideas, their concerns, complaints, any issue whatsoever. And the leader that's standing up, there's no net because you don't know what's coming. There's no retribution. We've been doing this for 20 years, and it has built, I think, a groundswell of trust and understanding within the company. And we do that every quarter all over the world.
Howard, thank you very much for spending time with us today.
You're welcome. I enjoyed it.
今天这个全球碰上了挫折，但我们的祖先也碰上过挫折。今天的挫折，这样的挫折100年、200年以后也会存在，但是全球化这个势头是不可能。我觉得全球化的规则也在不断的完善，但到今天的中国也好，今天的世界，大家对过去几十年全球化所带来的一些问题和挑战，全球化本身是需要完善的。所以我觉得是我们如何在全球化过程中考虑到发展中国家，考虑到中小企业，考虑到年轻人，考虑到每一个国家都能够因为这个全球化而发展。在今天的世界上，我们可以用更好的全球化的手段合作、开放，共同面对全球的挑战。这方面我认为我们可以做得更好。我觉得这次的疫情也好，最近的各国之间的贸易的摩擦、争论 ，WTO 的碰上的挑战，越来越显示我们几年前所说的观点：世界的贸易形势在发生巨大的变化。由于各国的经济发生了变化，生产的技术也就是生产力发生了巨大的变化，生产关系必须进行发展变化。全世界变成一个产业链，中国的制造业能力很强，但中国的设计能力，我认为还不如欧美。欧美的设计能力很强，但它的定制能力、制造能力确实很弱，所以全球会因为技术而进行协同起来，人类社会会因为这个效率更高，成本更低。所以我自己觉得，在这个时候，各国之间的配合和协同显得尤其关键。不讲其他国家，讲中国，小微企业巨大的机会在于中国经济本身巨大的内需潜力，发展内需，发展整个的消费经济，是整个中国未来巨大的机会所在。14亿人口所带来的巨大的内需需求，一定是每个小微企业的巨大机会。全世界200多个国家，有的是机会，只是你愿不愿意克服困难。你愿不愿意想出不同的方法？你愿不愿意为当地去创造真正的价值？你愿不愿意从长远的来看，而不是2、3年、2、3个月？所以再过几年看看，这个对有些人来讲，有些国家来讲，永远是困难，因为他不是用乐观的态度。对有些国家来看，这就是个机会。我觉得我感到了不起的是，中国人对美国的了解超越了美国对中国的了解。这首先第一点是我们中国人民的学习能力，因为我们敞开胸怀，我们学习别人，是的，学习这是让我们进步。过去40年，中国人的学习能力，中国人愿意了解世界的能力，使得我们这个国家与别的国家不一样，我们进步了。因为了解，所以信任。所以我自己觉得，我们要思考不同的方式， 让世界了解我们这个国家，了解我们的文化，了解我们的人民。你有多大的影响力，就要接受多大的挑战。盖茨在当年创造微软的时候，他就先人了一步，他看到了别人没看到的事情，他敢做别人不敢做的事情，才会成了微软，才有了比尔盖茨。所以每天有骂你人很多，对吧？每天说我们的人多了去了，但是如果你天天为这些事情去担心、去害怕，这世界上总有1%、2%的人，你说什么他都不相信，你干嘛花时间跟他们去生气呢？所以我觉得我没有为盖茨感到同情，我甚至很欣赏地看着他依然在争取，依然在尽最大努力。
Hi, my name is Jen, and I am a glocal. Now, a lot of you will be sitting there wondering, what the heck is a glocal? And you're right to wonder. I sometimes even wonder myself, and I'm up here talking about it. Because right now, it's an idea in my mind. It's a lifestyle I believe I'm leading, and I believe many other people are leading, but they don't have a word to define it. I don't have a set guideline, a set of rules, a step-by-step set of instructions for you on being a glocal, but what I have is an idea. Many of you might be familiar with the word glocalization. This is a word used by business to describe the process by which they assimilate. They adapt their products and their services to appeal to the needs and, more importantly, the wants of local communities and societies to boost sales and increase profits. I want to take this word back. I want to take it back and redefine it. I want to turn it from something that's about profit and consumerism and turn it into something far more powerful. I want to define glocal as the global local. Individuals who open themselves to the challenges that we're facing around the world, be daunted, be scared, but find the optimism that is necessary to act in the face of those challenges. Paul Coelho once said, "Every person on the planet plays a central role in the history of the world." I believe he was right. We all need to see ourselves, individuals and our communities, as spheres of change. I've always believed in the local and the individual as spheres of change. However, I didn't grow up, nor did I spend my formative years in a small community. At the age of 11, I moved from London, Ontario, to Oxford, England with my parents. I spent my time there doing my high school. I did both of my degrees in London, and I took every opportunity I had to travel, to adventure, to expose myself to as many different societies, different cultures as I possibly could, and learn as much as I possibly could about what fascinated me most, which was human and environment interaction and how to change the world for the better. I believe that it was my 15 years in England, traveling abroad, that allowed me to create the lifestyle that I see as being a global citizen. I always thought big, dreamt big. I spent as much time as I possibly could getting involved in social and environmental responsibility projects, and they inspired me to start my own film company to showcase these projects. I traveled around the world believing that mass communication of the mission and the vision of these people and these groups was the way to instigate global change. I still believe this, but I believe it is just one tool in a toolbox that we have to change the world. At that time, when I was living there, and even up to a year ago, I wouldn't necessarily have defined myself as a glocal. As I said, I dreamt big. I took part and led several international expeditions around the world, and the latest one, which you heard, I sailed across the ocean, the Atlantic Ocean, as part of a crew of 14 women, on a mission to make the unseen seen, from the plastics and toxics in our oceans to those in our own bodies. Now, when I signed up, I had never sailed before. So As much as the experience was exciting, it was hugely daunting. But it wasn't nearly as frightening as the issue we were highlighting. The presence and proliferation of plastics and toxics in the ocean, these little microplastics acting as sponges for toxics and chemicals that harm wildlife and through the food chain eventually lead to detrimental human health. As part of this trip and this journey, I have to admit, hands up, before I signed up, I actually had no idea about plastics and toxics in the ocean. And this was pretty shocking to me, considering I had spent much of my time and believed myself to be incredibly knowledgeable about human and environmental health. So I struggled when I first signed up. I was excited about the trip. I've always been excited about adventure, but I became extremely dismayed to learn about this actual issue. I felt disheartened. I felt scared. But instead of turning away, I tried to open myself up, to allow myself to accept that this problem exists, and that maybe, just maybe, me and this crew and whoever else followed us and might get involved could change the world. This was a big project. It was global. We had an international team. It was a global problem that demanded global solutions. And I'm extremely proud of what we've done. We sailed across the ocean, we collected research, we have published papers, we have disseminated our research. I was the filmmaker on the team, so I produced a feature-length documentary which has been shared in far and wide, and hopefully will continue to do so. But most importantly for me, I think the most powerful thing that has come out of this project and out of this trip was seeing and experiencing local action because of what we were doing. How did I experience this local action? Well, 6 months before I set sail with my team, I moved. I moved from a global city, London, England, with a population of 8.3 million people, to just outside a little village in southwestern Ontario, Bayfield, with a population year-round just shy of 1,000. I had an opportunity. Why did I move? I had an opportunity, once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, to set up an environmentally friendly outdoor recreation park. For someone like me, whose life is based around adventure, getting outdoors, encouraging others to do the same, it was too perfect. I couldn't pass up this opportunity. But it wasn't an easy process. Moving from somewhere that had been home, where I had grown up, where I had networks, I had used it as my base for change, how I believed I was going to contribute to the world, and I had no idea what I was heading into. What was going to be there for me? Was there even going to be people who thought the same, who cared, who were open? And I was nothing but surprised when I moved there. What I found instead was a community of glocals. I found people who were not only open to the issues I was talking about, the things I cared about, plastics in the ocean, poverty, whatever it was. Not only were they open, but they experienced and understood these problems as not only out there, but right here. Plastics are a perfect example. They are not just out there in the oceans. They are here in the Great Lakes. They are here in our backyard. And my next project is exploring the Great Lakes plastics and toxics. But what these people showed me is that not only were they open to these issues, understood that they exist, were scared by them, but they were willing to act. And they acted with guts and optimism and energy. Optimism is key. It's a hard thing to find. I am only human. And there are days when I wake up and I'm just overwhelmed by the world and the problems that we face. But it is key. In my latest talk, I got asked by someone, how do you have optimism? And I broke it down, I think, into two things. One is who I choose to surround myself with. And now, part of that is my community, which I never expected And number two is asking myself a question and understanding it as a daily choice. What am I or anyone or anything gonna gain from being anything but optimistic? And on days when I feel low, like I can't motivate myself, I think to someone who for me epitomizes what it means to be a glocal. And regardless of whether you're religious or not, I think we can all agree that Mother Teresa was a pretty incredible person. And she said, "I alone cannot change the world, but I can cast a stone across the waters and create many ripples." I am not asking people to change their lifestyle wholly. I'm not asking you to sail oceans, sell all your worldly belongings, move into the forest and forage for your food. What I'm asking you to do is open your mindset. Open yourself to issues, find optimism to act. Cast the stones, create the ripples. Many of you will be familiar with the phrase, think global, act local. I love this phrase, but it's only the first step, a powerful first step, in what I believe is being global. We need to push it farther. We need to understand that acting local instigates global change. We need to understand it's not just think global, act local. You are acting and you are thinking on both levels and every level in between. You have to believe that your actions will accumulate, that they will join the ranks of the actions of your family, of your community, of your province, of your country, of countries nearby you and far away, even on the other side of the planet. It is important to do that. That belief in ourselves as individuals, in our communities, is where our true power lies. My community has shown me that. It has shown that my actions and my words are being listened to. My glocal lifestyle is not going ignored or unnoticed. People are listening. People are learning. And people, most importantly, are acting. You and I, there's no difference between us. We are all people on this path called life, on this planet we call home. We have a choice every day when we wake up to act for the better of the planet, the people around us, and believe that those actions are better for everyone. Yesterday was Earth Day. For me, Earth Day is not an annual occurrence, one day where I choose to think about how my life impacts the world around me. It is my daily life. So I leave you with this. No rules, no guidelines, no step-by-step instructions. Just words as food for thought. Be passionate. Be open. Act. And most importantly, be optimistic. And if you believe that the energy, the action, the movement, whatever it is, doesn't exist where you are, this important sphere of change, create it. Thank you.
Today I'm going to tell you a story about identities and why identity is so important for us as persons and also for our cities. The psychological identity is the self-image of ourselves. Every one of us is a unique person, and that's what makes us so special. The self-esteem and the individuality is one of the most important elements we have ourselves. The same is for our cities. Every city, I love to travel. I'm a very curious person, and I love to see a lot, and I get inputs around the world. And for me, traveling was always a big input to see a cultural heritage, the climatic differences, and the places around were kind of sum up through different buildings. And obviously, as an architect, buildings are one of the most important issues for me. But I'm seeing more and more that with the modern architecture, we are kind of losing the souls of our cities, of our buildings. And this is, for me, a very big mistake that we are doing. Even if you look at the star architecture nowadays, we're seeing more and more architects that choose a way of doing stuff, very formal, very sculptural. And the result is sometimes the feeling that you could move buildings from one side to another one without having any relation to the place where we are building. And I don't think that this is the right solution for our cities and for the future. I want to quote a movie that for me is very important, maybe one of the most inspirational movies I saw as an architect, which was The Fountainhead. And in The Fountainhead, they said one sentence that is very important, which is, no two buildings have the same purpose. Why this? Because as soon as you change the place where you are acting as an architect, and as soon as you're moving a building to another place, as soon as you have different person using that building, then this building has to be different. This building has to have our own soul, like every one of us here. The sake of identity may result in some big mistake in our architecture world. I'm originally from Italy, and you might think this is my surrounding where I grew up. But if you have a closer look, you see that something is wrong. In fact, we are looking at Florencia village, which is in China, a very interesting city. They do it for shopping, but they are kind of lacking of self-esteem, showing this Venetian kind of like city in another continent. One of the biggest examples that you might know, it is Altstadt here in Austria, one of the most beautiful cities protected by the UNESCO heritage. And with an investment of $940 million, they redo it the same in China. If you might do a small research, you will notice that you have over 30 duplicates of the Eiffel Tower around the world. In the same size, even bigger, smaller. Even in Europe, we have it in Germany, we have copy even in France, in Romania. And I don't think that this is the way of acting in architecture. As I was saying, obviously, as an architect, my personal identity came as a very big output in what I'm doing. I grew up always following my father because he was a very creative person. He was always doing models, sketches, drawing. He didn't have the chance, though, to do a creative job like I have the chance to. And the result was I always knew what I was going to do. When I was 11, I was already drawing plans. I had already the feeling that with my work, with architecture and with the plans, I could make people feel better. I could do something for the cities. I always dreamed of a career. Even during my studies, where I was very engaged, I was already building, and I was doing exhibitions. I always dreamed of something that I could make with architecture, telling a story, improving lives, and also make people feel better through it. But when I started my career, I had the feeling I was kind of getting shaped like everyone else. Like I was somebody that always thought outside the box, and I was feeling that I was in a cage, like I was in the box, and I had to explode outside. Something wasn't the way I wanted it to have. So one day I woke up, and I looked at the mirror, and I asked myself if I was doing what I loved. At the beginning, I used to have doing local projects. They didn't communicate much. They didn't try to change so much. So that day, when I look at the mirror, I ask myself, when you packed your stuff and left Italy to seek for a better career, to change stuff, to learn more, to improve your knowledge, well, are you there where you wanted to be? And the answer was simply no. I wasn't doing what I loved. And so I had to do a change. I had to change something. And for me, it was a very emotional time. And we changed completely the office. And for 6 months, we didn't have any single client. It was a very tough time. But we started to do the architecture I always wanted to do. So that was a starting of a change. The first project I'm going to show you, this is the first project that it was very widely published, and for me it's also the first project that shows my seek of identity for the project that we are doing, for every single architecture that we are doing. It is in Guangzhou, China, on a site with a silo in almost the suburb, but the city is developing so much. And it was an old fabric tissue where there was a factory. And we decided to do this. It was actually a project for really creative people, and we had to create a very creative surrounding for them. But I still wanted to keep this identity, which was for me very important, these silos, and at the same time, the history and the heritage of this site, which was the boxes. The boxes because the site was a factory for packaging. So we needed to do something with these boxes and with these silos. For me, it was important that people would, especially in China where stuff is developing so much, and cities are changing so fast, by losing also the identity at the same time. So I knew that with these boxes we needed to do something. Obviously, this wasn't the right solution, so we had to come with a better solution and find out how can we move these boxes to make a nice building, to make it work, to make it people understand what we were trying to say. So we did something that was almost like a DNA, showing the life, showing the love for what they were creating, and at the same time creating the memory of the boxes, of the packaging, and at the same time of the silo. And this was the first project made me understand the change was worth, and I was trying to be, again, going on the right way. But still, when you are doing a change, you don't know if you choose the right path, if you are on track. But it was the first project that it was very widely published, and even before I came to several events, people would know this project, would ask me about, which was very important. But as I was saying, you still have to understand that you are taking the right track, because when you're doing a change, you are again blind, you don't know where to go. I was somebody who always knew what to do in life, because I had this feeling I have to build, I have to draw, I have to design. But then I lost myself on the way. And so this period was the most important of my career. And then I had the feeling that we found the path. With this project, this was a very big competition, probably one of the major in Europe. The project is in the center of the Central Park in Budapest, and it is very open, 360 degrees, because it has to be in a park where everybody can come from every direction. It is partly open and partly closed, with two forms that are the same. And one part is the open-air theater, and the reason why it is so close, it is for the acoustic of the building, but also for the insulation to the noises of the streets around. And the other part is the museum. This was the first project that made us think that we were going with the office in the right direction. When we got the email that we were chosen as finalists, we knew that we were going to fight against the world-leading architects. And we knew that this idea behind the project, which was turning music into shape, into form, was what we needed to do and what we had done right. And in that moment, when I came down to my closest collaborators, and I saw their faces, when I said, guys, we are going there where we want. It was so emotional for me, for them, looking the happiness in their faces. And we knew that we were going where we needed to go. And these images are the result of the starting of a new career, which is for me all I dreamed of for a very long time. And that's why you always have to keep your dreams as high, as big as possible, and do what you love. Because otherwise, your individuality is lost. And if you lose your individuality, it doesn't make sense. it's a waste of time. And you just have to keep going and have faith, because somehow it's not always easy to do what you love and what you dreamed of. But obviously, to achieve or to be sure that you were choosing the right path, you have to start to have confirmations, and you have to start to see that you are doing right. Last summer, we won a major competition in Beirut, where the reason why we won was very simple. We found and we understood the identity of the city. And we found several elements like the round curve, curtains, structure that would create a shade also in the building. The curtains that were like everywhere and like a natural ventilation, the greenery that is a way of keeping cool your terraces, your balcony, very simple elements. Beirut had the big civil wars, and after that they are doing very international projects that have started being very detached to the tradition. And for us, doing this project was very important and was the confirmation that we really choose the right way. And that's why local identity, because sometimes you need somebody from somewhere else to understand your local values that are very important for our cities. After we won the competition, was there in Beirut and presenting the project, and we are breaking ground probably spring 2017. And when I was there, I had the chance to meet George Arbid, which is the co-founder and director of the Arab Center for Architecture, which is creating something of an incredible value right now. He is doing an archive of all the modern architecture of Beirut and creating an archive, calling all the architects before they throw all away or they die, trying just to create this big archive, which is an heritage of immense value. And I was sitting with him on a table and having the chance to show him the project, and it was for me very important when he said, I can say at the end that this project is a Beiruti project. It's a project for this city, from this city. So for me, that was the confirmation that we were doing right, that we are finally on track. If you are capable of keeping your identity as an architect and as a person, and if you are capable of respecting and understanding the identity of a place, you can do great architecture. Thank you.
By the latter half of the 20th century, major new technological and economic processes of change were underway as national economies and infrastructure were becoming increasingly connected into global networks of exchange. The advent of low-cost computing and telecommunication networks would work to enable the development of ever larger, more complex systems of organization. In the 80s and 90s, financial markets became deregulated and expanded into a global network of exchange. We saw a huge rise in multinational corporations as they expanded beyond their national economies, entering into new markets. Through outsourcing, enterprises became distributed out. With advances in transport and trade liberalization, integrated global supply chains started to take form, and the global economy expanded hugely within the space of just a few decades. With the development of globalization, the emergence of the services economy and information technology, the global economy is going through a deep structural transformation, moving from an industrial model of mass production organized around the nation-state and its territory into a new form of services and information economy based around global networks of exchange. Urban networks are the physical means of connectivity. They are systems of technology that enable us to overcome physical borders and connect with ever larger networks. These networks of roads, of communications, of power lines, of logistics, air transport, shipping, are the physical form of this global connectivity. There are now vastly more resources moving around in these global networks than in any national economy, and around the world, people are flocking to cities as points of access into these emerging global networks and the opportunities they provide. As our economies and societies develop into some form of global organization, so too our technology infrastructure is morphing into a new structure of urban networks that enables this physical connectivity. Just as the industrial technologies provided the physical means for enabling the national economy, so too our technology infrastructure today is being reconfigured to provide the connectivity for a global economy. It is only in very recent years the global economy has switched from being dominated by agriculture and industry to becoming predominantly based on services and information. As a consequence, societies and economies around the world are being transformed from being primarily organized around physical agricultural and industrial processes within the national territory, and instead moving to the delivery of services, the processing of information and knowledge which is no longer defined by its physicality and the logic of territoriality, but instead is one based on the logic of access and connectivity. It is this connectivity that urban centers provide. As economies shift from being industrial to post-industrial services economies, a new strategic role is given to cities, as they become the locus of high value-added services, of innovation and knowledge creation. With globalization and urbanization, we are in the process of creating a new geography, a geography based around functional connectivity instead of physical borders. Whereas the building of the nation-state and its borders was cultural and ideological in nature, these global networks are functional in nature. Connections are made horizontally to facilitate exchanges in a world where market logic and technology have combined to create a powerful engine driving the world forward for better or worse. The infrastructure networks that now stretch around the planet are held together by urban centers that form dense concentrations of connectivity. Urban centers function as the hubs within regional networks that reach into the territory of the locality, linking it into larger networks of exchange. On the macro level, these urban centers become nodes within the global network of cities that provide the critical mass of advanced services required to operate the world economy at its current level of functionality. The leaders in providing this connectivity are what we call global cities. These are urban centers that provide the services for integrating the whole network. A network of over 100 global cities is now understood as the landing point for worldwide networks of finance and the hubs for logistics networks. These cities constitute a myriad of overlapping and intersecting flows of ideas, knowledge, people, money, goods, and have a direct and tangible effect on affairs around the planet. When the world is seen from this perspective of urban connectivity, a new image emerges, where each city is horizontally oriented to other cities of the same level of interconnectivity. As cities have become interconnected over the past decades, they have come to identify themselves increasingly in relation to their peer cities around the world, instead of so much with their national economy. As these major urban centers have risen, they have both come to take on more power and influence over their own operations and the operations of the global economy, but they have also come to differentiate themselves within these larger networks and increasingly compete with other cities. Being a global city, though, is not about size or even economic scale. It is about performing a differentiated function within a global network of exchange, and thus making them a strategic location within a worldwide value chain. Global cities play specific roles in specific networks. For example, cities like Taipei and Shenzhen are major nodes in the supply network for high-tech electronics, while cities like Geneva and Nairobi are important nodes in global civil society networks, Dubai and Hong Kong for air transport networks, Washington and Brussels for international political networks. But the absolute leaders in this global connectivity play a major role in almost all these networks: London, New York, Tokyo, and Paris. These urban networks are the most complex, multidimensional, and their influence is the farthest reaching. They regulate vast flows of financial capital, effectively coordinate millions of people and production processes in a multiplicity of overlapping complex networks. Tourist attractions, research centers, shopping destinations, tech startups, the engines of the knowledge economy, corporate headquarters, melting pots of people, ideas, culture, all concentrated in small areas of dense interaction and connected into information networks that shape the operations of the economy around the world.
We are at the end of globalization. We've taken globalization for granted, and as it drifts into history, we're going to miss it. The second wave of globalization began in the early 90s, and it delivered a great deal. Billions of people rose out of poverty. More impressively, wealth per adult in countries like Vietnam and Bangladesh increased by over 6 times in the last 20 years. The number of democracies rose, and countries as diverse as Chile, Malaysia, Estonia held free and fair elections. The role of women improved in many parts of the world. If you look at wage equality in countries like Spain or access to education in countries like Saudi Arabia. Economically, supply chains spread like webs around the world, with car parts crisscrossing borders before the final product came into place. And globalization has also changed the way we live now. It's changed our diets, it's changed how we communicate, how we consume news and entertainment, how we travel and how we work. But now, globalization is on its deathbed. It's run into the limitations of its own success. Inequality and new record levels of indebtedness, for example, world debt to GDP, is now pushing levels not seen since the Napoleonic Wars 200 years ago. Show us that the advantages of globalization have been misdirected. The global financial crisis was the result of this mismanagement. And since then, policymakers have done little but contain rather than solve the problems of our age. Now, some highly globalized countries, such as Ireland and the Netherlands, have managed to improve income inequality in their countries by better distributing the bounties of globalization through higher taxes and social welfare programs. Other countries have not been as good. Russia, and especially the United States, have extreme levels of wealth inequality, more extreme even than during the time of the Roman Empire. And this has convinced many people that globalization is against them and that the bounties of globalization have not been shared with the many. And now in 2020, we're confronted by the pandemic, which has shaken the ground under us and further exposed the frailties of the globalized world order. In past international crises, most of them economic or geopolitical, there has usually ultimately been a sense of a committee to save the world. Leaders and leading nations would come together. But this time, uniquely, there has been no such collaboration. Against the backdrop of trade wars, some countries like the US have outbid others for masks. There's been hacking of vaccine programs, and a common enemy, the pandemic, has not been met with the common response. So any hope that we might have a world vaccine or a world recovery program is in vain. So now we're at the end of an era in history, an era that began with the fall of communism, that set in train the flow of trade, of finance, of people, and of ideas, and that now comes to an end with events like the shutting down of democracy in Hong Kong. The question now is, what's next? Well, if the era we're leaving was characterized by a connected world trying to shrink and come together on the basis of economic goals and geography, the new world order will be defined by rival, distinct and different ways of doing things, and ultimately collaboration based on values. And this new world order is very much a work in progress. Disorder might be a better word, and it has been for some time. But think appropriately of great sheets of ice breaking apart, some drifting away and others later reforming. And the internet is a bit like this. It used to be global. Google used to have 30% of the market share in China, and now it has close to 0%. And the big regions of the world increasingly look at the internet from a values-based point of view. America values tech innovation and its financial rewards. China takes a political view of the internet and cordons it off. And at the same time, China has this incredible e-commerce economy that no other country has come close to matching. And then there's Europe. And in Europe, a conversation about the internet is effectively a conversation about data and privacy. So there you have it. One common problem and three increasingly different competing views. And this shows us that rival ideologies will drive very distinct ways of doing things. But what about collaboration and cooperation? Well, I'm going to start with the example of three small countries: Scotland, Iceland, and New Zealand. And a couple of years ago, they signed up to the Wellbeing Economy Governments, whose aim is to foster ecological and human well-being as well as economic growth. Practically speaking, these countries are already discussing things like well-being budgeting, well-being-led tourism, and using the well-being framework in the fight against COVID. Now, these three countries are about as geographically distant and diverse as you can get, but they've come together on the basis of a shared value, which is a common understanding that there is more to government policy than merely GDP. Similarly, in the future, other small countries and city-states, Singapore, Switzerland, the United Arab Emirates, will find that they have more in common with each other than with their larger neighbors. They're all global financial centers, they all invest in strategic planning, and they are all geopolitical micropowers and will collaborate more as a result. Another good example of how values rather than geography will increasingly shape destinies and alliances is Europe. During the period of globalization, one of the key phenomena was the eastwards expansion of the European Union. From 2004, it added 13 new members, despite the near existential crisis of the euro, constant pressure from Russia, and of course the trauma of Brexit. And like a company that has grown too fast, Europe needs to stop and think about where it's going and ask whether its values can steer it in the right direction. And this is beginning to happen, albeit slowly. European leaders talk a lot about European values, but frankly, most Europeans, be they German, Greek, Latvian, or Spaniards, really don't know or have a clear idea what those shared common values are supposed to be. So European politicians need to do a very good job of asking them how they feel about these common values and then communicating the answers back to them in a clear and tangible way. And of course, social media is a very important tool to deploy here. And as Europe moves from a union that's based more on values and less on geography, its contours and those values themselves will increasingly be defined by the tension between Brussels and countries like Hungary and Poland, who are increasingly behaving in ways that go against basic values, such as respect for democracy and the rule of law. The treatment of women and the LGBT community are other important markers here. And in time, Europe will and should tie financial aid to these countries and policy to their adherence to Europe's shared values. And these countries and others in Eastern Europe and Cyprus still have close financial ties to Russia and China. And again in time, they will be forced to choose between Europe and its values and these other countries and their own distinct values. Like Europe, China is another big player with a very distinct set of values or contract between the people and the state. And I have to say that this set of values is not one that is well understood in the West. And given China's extraordinary economic and social transformation in the last 30 years, we should really be more curious. China's values are rooted deep in its history, in a desire to regain the place it once enjoyed hundreds of years ago, when its economy was the dominant one. Indeed, Xi Jinping talked of the China dream well before Donald Trump was elected with the catchphrase, "Make America Great Again." And China's system, viewed from the outside, is based around a contract or a bargain where people will sacrifice their liberty in return for order, prosperity, and national prestige. It's one where the state is very much in control, which is something that most Europeans and Americans will find alien. It's also a system that has worked very well for China, but the biggest risk it faces is a period of high and prolonged unemployment that will break this contract between the state and the people. And for other countries, China can be an attractive partner. It can provide capital and know-how. I'm thinking, for example, of Pakistan and Sri Lanka, two members of the Belt and Road Program. But this partnership comes at a price. They're beholden to Chinese technologies, such as the controversial Huawei. Chinese investors own their debt, and as a result control key infrastructure, such as the main port in Sri Lanka. Now, I find that when we talk about globalization, the end of globalization, and the New World Order, we spend far too much time discussing America, Europe, and China, and not enough time on the many exciting things happening in fast-growing economies from Ethiopia, Nigeria, to Indonesia, Bangladesh, Mexico, and Brazil. And in the New World Order, the question for these countries is what model to follow and what alliances to build. And many of them, during the period of globalization, had become used to being told what to do by the likes of the IMF, the International Monetary Fund. But the age of condescension is now over. So the tangible opportunity in a less uniform, more value-driven world for these countries is that they have much greater choice in the path to follow, and arguably greater pressure to get it right. So should, for example, Belarus and Lebanon follow the Irish model or that of Dubai? Does Nigeria still think it has shared values with the Commonwealth countries? Or will it ally itself and its fast-growing population to China and its model? And then think of one of the few female leaders in Africa, President Sahle-Work Zewde of Ethiopia, and whether she might be inspired by the work of Jacinda Ardern in New Zealand or Nicola Sturgeon in Scotland, and tangibly how she can transfer their example to policy in Ethiopia. Of course, it may be that in this new world order, countries like Kenya and Indonesia decide to go their own way and build out their own value sets and their own economic infrastructure. And in this way, the arrangements and the institutions of the future will be crafted much less in Washington and Beijing, but really by countries like Tunisia and Cambodia, comparing notes on how to battle corruption through technology, how to build education and healthcare systems for burgeoning populations, and how to make their voice heard on the world stage. So as globalization ends and chaos seems to reign, these countries, their young populations, and the scope they have to build new societies are the future and the promise of the new world order. Thank you.